I'd like to go over a few things post disassembly. You can see here that the tip of the mainspring is broken and that was rubbing inside the barrel. You can see some marks in there, so I just replaced the mainspring with another one that I had. You can see that the main movement is quite dirty. I don't know if it's visible in the video, but it's quite dirty. So this movement definitely needed a service. Here it's just under magnification. Now these are the parts that are stored in the part box. It is stored in the same way that I disassembled it, so that I'll just go in the reverse order while assembling it. And as you can see here, I'm not washing the balance set. Also not seen here is the pallet lever. Now if I just clean them in mercury, it leaves a sort of a residue on them, which has to be rinsed out with white petrol. Since I don't have white petrol, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and I'm using surgical spirit for the job, which is alcohol based. The shellac that is holding the pallet jewels in place and the roller jewel in place gets dissolved, and these things can get dislodged. Now, and that thing happened to me on this watch itself, so I had to change the pallet lever itself. That was an oversight from my side. So it is better not to wash them with the mercury and then rinse them in alcohol, or you can wash them in mercury and then rinse it in white petrol. If you're using a cleaner like benzene, you don't need to rinse it at all, so that is way better. Also, if you wash the balance in mercury or dip it in surgical spirit, the hairspring can get quite damaged. It has happened to me before, so I prefer not washing that as well. But for a proper service, washing the balance set and the pallet lever is definitely necessary. For that, you can either get white petrol, or you can get only those cleaned by watch mechanic. Because if you are very passionate about servicing the watch by yourself, you can get those cleaned by the watch mechanic and do the rest of the work yourself. But even otherwise, the watch will run. Now we'll talk about the cleaning and rinsing of the parts. This is the method that I follow. I use this liquid called as mercury. It's an ammonium based solution. It may cause some irritation to some people. Now you can see that I have small boxes in which I've stored the parts. I've put the parts in these boxes based on the size, and then I've filled it with this liquid that is mercury, and then I've covered the lid to those small boxes and a small cardboard on top of the other, because I didn't have a lid for that. And then I'll just leave it for some time, probably overnight. Now here I'm cleaning the mainspring mainspring barrel for assembly. Now you can see that I have taken out the barrel cap and the arbor out of the box for just cleaning it. So you can see that I have put it out on a tissue paper on my table. I'm just trying to drain the excess fluid off onto the tissue paper from all these three parts. It's not preferred to touch it by your hand, but it should do even otherwise. Now I'm using these toothpicks to clean the insides. You will have to clean around the edges where you can see some old oil stuck. So I'll have to clean that using a toothpick, or a pegwood is preferred for the job. But if you don't have one, you can use a toothpick. That is the hole through which the arbor would go, so even that has to be cleaned. Just make sure that you don't see any sort of a residue of oil inside the barrel. Now here somehow I found a stray piece of hair sitting inside the barrel, probably after I disassembled the movement, so I had to remove that. And then now I'm cleaning it again. I just don't use any sharp objects for cleaning. Now I'm just giving a final touch with a piece of pegwood. I prefer to just rinse the parts back in the solution again after cleaning. Now here I am cleaning the barrel cap. Again, I'm following the same method, clean around the edges and remove excess amount of oil. Now, final round of cleaning with the pegwood. Now I'm just going to rinse it back in the solution again. Now, I had let the parts in the solution overnight, so I'm just rinsing it for some short interval of time now. Now, a bit of like a simple shaking of the box may also be necessary to make sure that the liquid, cleaning fluid flows into all the smaller areas of the parts. Now I'm just going to drain out the excess fluid again after some time. Again, I have taken out the barrel cap and the arbor. Now, in this cup, I have filled some amount of surgical spirit. I'm just going to rinse the parts in that. It is just to remove the residue of the mercury cleaning fluid and then just dry it out. Now, this is really not preferred. You'll have to use white petrol, but since I don't have white petrol, I'm using this surgical spirit. Surgical spirit dries off very quickly, just like white petrol, and you can see that it is easily drained off the parts. Now I'm just going to use my blower to puff some air onto the parts so that the fluid gets off these parts, and then it will dry a lot more faster. And be careful that the fluid may just jump off the parts and may get into your eye, so just hold it a bit away from your eyes and then blow it. Now I'm going to clean the mainspring. You can see I have folded a piece of paper in an sort of an L shape, and I'm going to use that to clean the mainspring. You can see that I'm just sliding it down the mainspring so that all parts of the mainspring will get clean. Inaccessible parts of the mainspring can be cleaned with the pegwood or a toothpick. I'll slide it as far as possible. Just be careful that you don't end up breaking the mainspring at any point. In this particular case, the mainspring was not really dirty, but if you have a really dirty mainspring, a watch that is not serviced for a long period of time, After cleaning the mainspring on this piece of paper, you should be able to see a lot of dirt. But in this case, it turned out that the mainspring was relatively clean. You can see that there's not really too much of dirt or oil sticking to that, oil or mainspring grease. Now some prefer to clean the mainsprings while it is still in the barrel, but this is the method that I prefer. And if you're I'm here cleaning the center part of the mainspring that is not accessible by a piece of paper. And if you're really servicing the watch for the first time, then I wouldn't recommend you to remove the mainspring and clean it. You may not open the mainspring barrel at all, because it needs some amount of experience to just open the mainspring and put it back in place. I'm using the same surgical spirit to just dry the mainspring again, to sort of rinse the mainspring and dry it. Now please don't be a miser like me, so you can use some amount of new fluid. I'm just taking it from the same container that I have used to clean the other parts. I just don't want any residue of the cleaning fluid sticking in there, so I'm just going to blow the surgical spirit off, and I'll just keep all the parts for drying. And once they are dried, they are ready for assembly. Now there is a big debate, if you check on the internet, whether to grease the mainspring or lubricate it with oil. But I prefer oil. Now here I'm just going to clean all the parts with Rodico. This just removes any small amount of dirt that could have got into there, or any sort of drying fluid, any sort of cleaning fluid that is not yet dry. So it is very important to clean these parts using Rodico. I prefer using oil on the mainspring, as I've heard from some watch mechanics. But some say that grease is really good and it gives better amplitude compared to oil. I'm just going to press the barrel down onto Rodico so that it removes any sort of remaining dirt. By dirt, I mean the oil that was put in there before I serviced the watch. Oil, as it gets older, like after 2-3 years after servicing, it turns quite hard, and that can be quite bad to the moving parts inside the watch. You can see that I have some amount of oil in the oil cup. I'm just going to lubricate all the parts with that oil. This is a method that I followed from Watch Mechanic, to just dip the side of the arbor in the oil directly, or you can just apply the oil with the oil pen, but make sure that you don't add too much of oil at any point of time. If you do add too much of oil, just drain it onto the tissue paper. I'm just going to lubricate the other surfaces of the arbor. Now I'll have to lubricate the inside of the barrel. So for that, I'll just first lubricate the hole through which the arbor would pass. Now I'm going to use a piece of pegged wood, dip it slightly in oil, and then apply it to the inside of the barrel, so that the mainspring would have no trouble when it slides inside the barrel. Whenever we wind a watch, it would slide inside the barrel, and the same thing happens as it unwinds. So it should have no friction while that is happening. So I'm going to lubricate even the insides of the barrel cap in the same way. Just spread it, don't leave too much of oil at any place. even too much of oil can be very bad for a watch. So just make sure that you're applying the right amount of oil, and if you do apply excess of it, just drain it onto the tissue paper. Or you can just use the Rodico to remove the excess oil. Now I'm just going to place the arbor into its position, and then I'm going to check for the freedom of the arbor. It should be free to move inside the arbor. I'm going to close the barrel cap or the barrel lid. And then I'm going to hold the arbor between the tweezer. Tweezer. I'm just going to grip it in the tweezer and then try and rotate the barrel and make sure that it's quite free to turn. It should quite freely spin there. And once you're sure of that, just open the barrel again. Just open the barrel again. Just keeping that aside for the time being, and I'm going to lubricate the mainspring. Now you can see that I have a piece of paper, and then I'm going to put some amount of oil on it. It is very much similar to how I clean the mainspring. Now this is a method that I saw online. You may prefer doing it by a different method, but I just follow this method. Small amount of oil right in there. You may also want to grease your mainspring. One reason I prefer oil is because I don't want to buy a separate box of grease just for the mainspring, since I do it under a budget. And there's good amount of oil on the paper now, so I'm just going to use that piece of paper to lubricate the mainspring. I'm lubricating the innermost loop of the mainspring that is not accessible by the paper. I'm using the oil pin for that, and I'm just spreading that with the piece of pegwood. Now I'm going to lubricate the rest of the mainspring. Now there's also a tool to lubricate the mainspring. You may prefer to buy that as well. You can see the major disadvantage of this method is that after lubricating the mainspring, you're still touching with your hand, which will leave some amount of dirt on the mainspring. That may not be really good for a watch. Lubricate the tip of the mainspring as well. And now it should be ready to insert inside the mainspring barrel. Now observe how the mainspring was before you disassembled it. Now you can see that I have put it in the same orientation, but you can see that the end part of the mainspring is looped in the opposite way. I'll have to force it to loop in the same way as the rest of the mainspring. This is done so because you'll have extra torque as the watch unwinds. Now I'm just going to force the first round in. It takes a bit of patience to do this, and the mainspring might jump off a couple of times if you're doing this for the first time. Once one round to two round is inside the barrel, then you should have no issues getting the rest of it inside the barrel. Now, many prefer to use a mainspring winder for this job, but most of the watch mechanics here I've seen they just do it by hand, just like this. The major advantage of the mainspring winder is that it doesn't damage the mainspring while you're inserting in here. Now, if you just insert a mainspring with your hands and then remove it again, you'll see that the bit of a bends in the mainspring. Now, that doesn't happen if you are using a mainspring winder. Just take your time to insert the mainspring one round after the other, and make sure that you are not leaving you're not leaving a mainspring out of your grip. It may just jump out. Now you can see that as I near the center of the mainspring, it is quite a lot more easier to insert the mainspring in place. Now I'm just going to push the center part of the mainspring into its position. You can see that the mainspring is completely in right now. Now, if you do have confusion on on what direction the mainspring should be put in, that is clockwise or counterclockwise, you may just take a photograph before you're disassembling the mainspring from the mainspring barrel. Now, I take photographs for every single step that I do on a particular watch, especially if I am working on a new movement and I don't have a manual. I'm putting the barrel in place here. I'm just going to follow the same procedure as I did to remove it. Just put it in the center, twist it slightly, and then slide it in. Twist it in the clockwise direction so that the mainspring opens up a little bit. Then just push it in, and it should just lock into place. Now, if you do miss to take a photograph, the other method is to just analyze how the mechanism works, and then you should be able to easily conclude in which way the mainspring should be. Now you can see that the arbor is in place right now, and I'll have to close the barrel lid. I'll just apply some amount of oil on the top of the mainspring coil, using a piece of pegwood. I'm just going to close the barrel lid. It should just snap into place. Make sure that it is completely snapped, otherwise it may rub against the bridge. I'm just going to clean that with a piece of Rodico. And I'm just going to grip it in the tweezer again, and now in this time when I turn the barrel, it should resist that turning. It should have some amount of tension. Now here I'm going to clean the main plate. I'm just going to take the main plate out of the solution, and then let the extra fluid drain onto the tissue papers. The tissue paper. I'm also cleaning the balance cock along with the main plate. Whenever you're handling the balance cock, just be careful about a small pin that is in the regulator index. This determines the regulation of the watch, so it's quite delicate. You might end up breaking it, so be a bit careful about that. Now I'm going to use a piece of a toothpick to clean the jewels and the other parts where the gears would run. The pegwood is preferred for this job. You should sharpen the end of the pegwood and then use it for this job. but as I've read somewhere, it takes years of experience to just get the tip of the pegwood sharp enough for the job. So I'm using a piece of, I'm using a toothpick here. Now here I will just speed up the video to show the whole process. I'm just going to clean all the jewels. The centermost jewel, it's a through it has a through hole, so you'll have to clean it thoroughly. I'm just going to clean all the parts, even on the dial side of the movement. I'm going to dip it back in the solution again. Just drain the excess fluid off again. Now I'm just going to rinse that in in surgical spirit. A surgical spirit is actually based on IP, that is isopropyl alcohol. I'm just going to drain the excess of surgical spirit on the tissue paper and then just going to blow it off. And same thing I'm going to do with the balance cock. Now once the main plate and the balance cock is dry, we can assemble the balance. As I mentioned earlier, I have not cleaned the balance. Now the hairspring could have gone quite dirty, so it is good if you can clean it with either benzene or white petrol. Now I'm going to clean the roller jewel with a piece of Rodico, but make sure that the hairspring doesn't get tangled in Rodico and get damaged. It shouldn't basically touch the Rodico itself. At any point, if you cannot see those small parts, it is better you should use an eye loupe for that. I'm just going to place it in its correct position. Now the part I'm pointing to, if it's visible in the video, it's called as the roller jewel, that is under the balance. It is just a small piece of synthetic ruby that is stuck in place with shellac, and that makes continuous contact with the pallet lever, the fork of the pallet lever. Now I'm going to assemble the balance set onto the balance cock. I'm just going to place the balance cock on a firm surface in an upside down direction, and then you can see that I have aligned the stud hole to the centermost hole in the riveting block, so that I can just push the stud into its place. And the hairspring should run between the small pin on the regulator index and the lock. Now I'm going to use the oil pin again to close that lock onto the hairspring. Once that's done, there is a very small screw to close the stud hole to hold the stud in its place, and I'm just going to screw that tight. You may have to use an eye loupe while doing this operation. You may also prefer to use a small screwdriver which is well sharpened for this job. Now always keep the balance in this position when it is not on the movement, that is with the balance wheel facing you and not the hairspring. Now I'm just going to assemble it onto the balance, onto the main plate. I'm just going to screw that in place. Now if you do have a machine for cleaning the watch parts, then you can leave the balance in this position itself even after disassembling, and then clean the main plate along with the balance. You can see that the balance wheel can swing quite freely now, but I'll just go ahead and clean the Inca block gels that is on either side of the balance assembly. Now the Inca block gel set contains two parts, that is the cap gel and the hole gel. Now one more thing I should look for is if the watch is in bait. Now you should be able to see two pins which is there to restrict the excess movement of the pallet lever. Now between them should be the roller gel that I have circled in this picture right now. It should align exactly between those two pins or the banking pins, and that means that the watch is in beat. Otherwise you may have to adjust the beat with a small slot on the collet using an oil pen. Now in this case the watch is in beat. Now just give a bit of a spin to the balance wheel and make sure that the watch when the balance wheel stops, the roller gel will still be at the same position. In the HMT 0231 movement, we don't have a beat adjustment lever, hence the adjustment should be done on the collet itself. Now here I'm going to remove the cap jewel first of the Inca block assembly, or parashock as HMT calls it as. There are different types of assemblies, but in the HMT you'll have to rotate a small sort of an arm that is at the end of the cap jewel to a small slot that you can see, and then you should be able to just lift the cap jewel off. It would be free now. You can see that there. Once that is off, you can remove the cap jewel using a small piece of Rodico. Don't attempt to remove the cap jewel with the tweezer. You may either end up damaging it or losing it, and these are very delicate parts. You can see that the cap jewel is out as well. Now I'm just going to clean these two parts with the Rodico itself, or you may prefer to clean it in the white petrol. And I'm just going to lubricate the inner surfaces, that is where the balance staff pivot would stick out. You should have a small film of oil around the pivot of the balance staff inside there. You can see that the balance wheel tends to spin as I just touch that tip of the pivot. Now I'm going to lubricate the cap jewel as well, just with a very tiny drop of oil. Don't add excess of oil, just a tiny drop should do the job. Now just hold it very slightly with the tweezer and just put it into its place. Just slide it into its place literally, and make sure that it is in the proper position. That is the pivot of the balance staff should stick out from the hole in the hole gel. Now if even if this is slightly tilted, you may have issues later with the amplitude of the watch. I'm just going to clean the cap gel slightly and lubricate even that. Again, a tiny drop of oil should do the job. and at no point should you touch any oil to the hairspring. That will adversely affect the functioning of the watch. Just put it in that slot, put that arm around the cap jewel in the slot there and turn it so that it will be locked. Now you can see that it's assembled. Now you have a in-cup block assembly in the exact similar fashion on the bottom end of the balance as well, or the dial side to be precise. Clean that in the same way and lubricate it. Once that's done, you can see just by shaking the movement, the balance wheel runs freely, and it should run for some time just like that. Now I'm just going to clean the other parts. Now I will speed up the video again. Here you can see I'm cleaning quite a few bridges at the same time, and I'm just going to clean the old oil and dirt off with the toothpick and the pegwood, and I'm just going to clean the jewels as well, and I'm going to rinse it back in the solution. Now the gears don't usually require a lot of cleaning. Since this is the ratchet wheel, you can clean that with a piece of pegwood. The other gears you cannot really do a lot about it. Just let the excess fluid drain onto the tissue paper, and then if you see any sort of a dirt, see if you can clean it without doing any sort of without causing any sort of damage to the gear. I'm cleaning the SLS here, and that is the ring around which the crown wheel would run. It may not really be necessary to clean the crown, but I'm just going to clean it anyway. Now I'm going to rinse all these parts in surgical spirit. And I'm going to dry it with some puffing of air. Now I'm just going to give a short demo on how to peg the jewel holes. Here I'm doing that on a pallet bridge. I'm using a toothpick, but you should really use a sharp piece of pegwood for that job. You should sharpen a piece of pegwood. Now just clean the jewel hole with the sharpened piece of a toothpick. This is really necessary for a good service, and you should be able to see that the dirt will get cleared from the jewel hole. By dirt I mean the old oil. I'm rinsing few parts of the keyless works here. Okay, this is one mistake that I did, that I rinsed the palette lever in the surgical spirit, and that damaged the palette lever. And it's quite difficult to find shellac here, so I was not able to fix that palette lever and I had to buy a new one. Now you may also prefer to brush the parts clean with a brush that is available specifically for that purpose. Now this particular cleaning flow in Mercury, on it it's written that the brushing is not required, so I don't usually brush the parts.